All right, so let's close out these Emerald Dream mini set card reviews. Unfortunately, we still have a long way to go. It's like 2 weeks to the mini set, so we're gonna be sitting on these a while. But we got like what is it, Death Knight, Priest, Warrior, and Warlock today. Sadly, not the strongest cards across the board, and I think Priest in particular, man, there are some stinkers in Priest. But we do have at least this very cool Death Knight Lester here, Volcaros. This is an 8-mana double unholy 5/5 elemental beast with rush and taunt. It's a lot of stuff to get out of the way. And this silly battle cry here: choose to spend 10, 20, or 30 corpses to gain that many stats. So this is potentially going to be a very big boy here, a 15-15, 25-25, or 35-35, which I just love, like silly big numbers like that. Playing a 35-35 sounds very, very fun. Also, technically, you can give this charge now with a Dark Gift. Can maybe try to build towards that. I think that'd be pretty unreliable, and frankly, getting to like 30 corpses is not like easy. It's not necessarily hard to do, but like getting to that stage of the game and not having already won or lost might be the hard thing to do. Like that just takes a while to get that many corpses acquired. And then, you know, the payoff here is, I mean, if you get charged, it's a cool payoff. Otherwise, though, it's just kind of stats for stats' sake. I mean, the rush and the taunt both do help this card. You know, even at a 15-15, there will be games and there will be moments where playing a 15-15 taunt feels like it seals the deal because the opponent just doesn't have like hard removal, or you know, they're just slamming a bunch of bodies into it, or you find some way to give this life steal or something, right? And then all of those things do make this like an interesting little tool. And I think this card is a little better than people are giving it credit for. I think, you know, a 15-15 rush taunt is a solid play even at 8 mana. There are going to be moments where that feels fine because you just to clean a big threat of your opponents or whatever, some key thing, and you're left behind with a scary threat on board. I mean, we've all seen those like 15-15 ceaselesses that are meaningful threats on board back when he was 15-15. Now, you know, as a comparison, obviously, that's not very favorable because Ceaseless cleared an entire board. It cost 0. Volcaros cost 8. But you get the point. The stats still can sometimes be meaningful, especially because they're activated with Rush and Taunt. Now, you know, that said, I don't think you're almost ever going to see this come down as a 25 or 35 stat minion. Like the 20 and 30 corpse options are just going to take too long. Rarely is that ever going to hit. Or is it going to feel like meaningfully worth it? Like, you know, if it's going to die to removal, it's going to die as a 15-15 and a 35-35. Single target removal out there is just going to clean this up too easily. And there will be plenty of other instances where maybe you don't have the corpses or your deck is spinning corpses otherwise. And this could just feel like it's kind of sit in hand too long or too late. Or your game plan has just left it in the dust and you didn't need to run it in the first place. So yeah, I'm going to try to do some silly charge stuff with this. We'll try to make a big guy and see what it can do. I just think this often gets left out of decks in essence. All right, so moving on here to the Frostburn Matriarch, a 5-mana 4/4 dragon with a pretty crazy battle cry. If you're holding a minion with a dark gift, summon 2 4/4 dragons with taunt, which amazing payoff. Like actually a 3 stack of 4/4 bodies, 2 of them having that taunt, you know, creating some friction there. That's really, really good. I'm happy to do that, I think, for 5 mana very often. The question for me is, unfortunately, these dark gifts, right? We've got 1 dark gift card that gets played in Death Knight with Rite of Atrocity. There's also Creature of Madness. The 2-drop gets played a lot in like Menagerie Death Knight. So there are a couple things Death Knight's already doing with dark gifts. We're also going to get 1 more card here, Cremate. Discover a minion with a dark gift. It costs 2 less. Or as I like to call it, the Primordial Dark Glyph. It's like Primordial Glyph, guys. Kind of costs 3, but you get the idea. So this is another option. I actually don't think this one's a great option because discovering a minion, it's not narrowing the pool any. Like Creature is really good because it's getting you a 3-drop on curve, and Rite of Atrocity is really good because it's narrowing down to undeads, which are consistently going to be a little bit lower cost and more aggressive and stuff. This one being generic, I think, does hurt it. You know, it's kind of costing only 1 again for the dark gift, sort of like Rite of Atrocity. Which is cool because sometimes you can like cheat bigger stuff out too, you know, find an 8 cost, make it cost 6, cheat it out early. All of those things are upsides for this, but the generic pool, it's just going to be so hard to hit what you really want. You're going to get so many like random, you know, low cost neutral cards and stuff that just suck. That I think this just doesn't push Dark Gift any further in Death Knight. So basically, how many Dark Gift cards are you willing to commit to a Death Knight package to pay this off? And is it worth sacrificing what you're already doing well in those decks to run a few more Dark Gifts to more consistently hit this? Because of course you have to hit it by turn 5, which isn't necessarily hard even with just 4 early game Dark Gifts. But at the same time, you know, sometimes you also just really want to play those. If you're playing creature on 2, you often really want to play that 3-drop on turn 3 to reward that Dark Gift payoff as soon as possible, which means you're not leaving it in hand for your Frostburn Matriarch. So, you know, basically a couple checks on this, like just from a timing window standpoint, from a like being stuck with a Dark Gift in hand that you want to play. I worry both of those hold this back. And then just, again, contextually, like, does the deck really make an excuse to do this? I don't know, man. If you don't have to overcommit to your Dark Gifts and like you can just have a couple of good ones and this hits consistently enough, like this card's a solid payoff. I just don't think that's going to come together. I think this is actually, despite being really good when it connects, I just don't think it connects enough and gets left out. I don't think this card gets played a ton. So let's go ahead and move on over to Priest, which, man, people are memeing hard on Priest. And normally when I see that, I'm like, oh, come on, it's not so bad. You guys are overreacting about Priest or whatever other class, you know, like, oh, the cards aren't that bad. I think, unfortunately, the Priest cards are kind of bad, guys. I'm not going to come in here and tell you that the Priest cards are being mistreated. I think they kind of suck. And I think they're really bad for Imbue Priest too, which is unfortunate. So this is maybe the best of the 3. Smoldering Ascent, 2-mana fire spell, deal 1 damage to all enemy minions. And of course, this is a Smoldering cycle card. So this upgrades each turn, but discards after 3. So at some point, you know, this is going to deal 3 damage to all enemy minions. And since the beginning with these Smoldering cards, I've been saying, right, they need to not be conditional on when you play them, and they need to be cheap. This one's cheap, which is nice, but it's awfully conditional. In other words, you know, you have board states you're trying to react to specifically with numerical values that are important. So it's like, yes, if this just generically always dealt 3, you can leave it in hand and find a great moment where dealing 3 to the board is amazing. Or maybe even if it just always consistently dealt 2, you could have those moments as well. But finding the intersection of when this is in hand and upgraded and you're looking to react to a board, that creates this real time pressure that I think is awfully awkward for one of these Smoldering cards, because that moment may never arise and then this card gets discarded, or you may have to kind of suboptimally play it and make some tough decisions, or, you know, blow your curve a little bit to weave this in. And all of those things, I think, make this just a little bit clunkier than it needs to be. I mean, it's not like terrible sometimes, even if it just like clears a 3/3. Maybe you're not like so sad that happened for 2, but at the same time, you know, you're giving up that card slot that could have been something else that clears a 3/3. And so rarely is this going to be that home run payoff that hits big that I just don't think it's worth it. I will also just note that, like, for Imbue purposes, this is a really tough card to get off Imbue because it needs time to be its best. And when you find it off your Imbue hero power, it's always just going to be 1, and then it's going to get discarded anyway off Imbue. So these cards that need time to scale up naturally counter synergize with the Imbue package in Priest. And unfortunately, this is not the only card that's gonna do that. And we already had some of those cards that you like need to be in hand, and as you cast spells, they get upgraded. Those were in the base set, and we're about to see another one that are all bad with Imbue. So it just feels kind of senseless to me in a weird way, and I just don't think this card's good enough generically either to push past that. So unfortunately, not only is this probably a card that gets ignored by Priest, but also just makes Imbue Priest worse by existing, if that makes sense. Speaking of that, this is Light of the New Moon. Another one of those cards that gets better after you've cast 3 spells, which again is just kind of counter synergistic with Imbue Priest, because when you find this off your hero power, it is incredibly hard sometimes to activate that and get the bonus. Now, I will say this bonus is a little bit worse than some of the bonuses in the base set we saw. Like, some of those bonuses are really important to the card feeling good. I think this bonus is just kind of a bonus. In other words, you probably don't hate playing this sometimes just as a 3/3 buff for 3. At the same time, that's not an exciting play either. You know, this is Blessing of Kings. This is a 10-year-old Hearthstone card, basically, and if you're trying to run this in your deck, like hard running this in your deck, the fact that it gets returned to hand is not a particularly exciting upside. Like, it's okay, you know, it's a little bit of extra value, it's a bonus, but priest decks just historically don't love this kind of effect. Faster priest decks do exist, but they just don't need these kind of buffs necessarily. We have had a handful of like priest buffy decks that have done things, but those always had like some kind of really weird trick or super cheap buffs or health flips or something crazy going on that this just feels a little bit too honest for. So to me, like, the value upside on this card is minimal, because that doesn't really benefit the kind of decks that care about the aggression upside and the buff upside. So again, it's just kind of a card that's at odds with itself, and again at odds with the imbue package for priest. So I just don't see this card getting there either. And again, I think it just makes imbue priest worse. All right, so moving on here to the Spirit of the Kaldorei. Maybe this is really the best priest card, but I don't know. I think its fate is inherently tied to imbue priest, a deck that is really, really struggling and maybe just got worse. It's a 2-mana 1/3 undead with taunt and lifesteal. Battle cry: if you use your hero power this turn, gain +2/+2, which makes this a 3/5 taunt for 2 mana. But that said, you know, you're kind of only ever spending 4 or more in order to get this done, because you got a hero power first. So probably never hitting the board before turn 4. I mean, you can play it as a 1/3 taunt lifesteal, but that's really bad. 3/5's interesting. That's kind of like that old Demon Hunter card we had from when Demon Hunter first landed, the Ash Tongue something or other. That's okay. Like, it's not great at turn 4, but it's not bad. There will be moments where, you know, that's enough of a little wall, heals 6 or something, you're really excited. And I will say too, like, playing Imbue Priest, there are those moments where you imbue looking for something and you don't hit anything. You just kind of need leftover stuff to do to fill your mana. And this comes in and it probably feels okay. It fills that slot all right. Falls off hard later, but, you know, it's only 2 mana, so it's not a big commitment. So it's fine. That said, it's only fine in Imbue Priest. I don't think this gets played anywhere else. I mean, maybe if there's some crazy hero power stuff that comes along soon, but I doubt that, because we just got the Imbue stuff. And Imbue's bad. Like, Imbue Priest is just really bad. It has terrible numbers, terrible data. I don't see that getting necessarily much better. So even if this card's okay in that deck is bad, which just lowers the ceiling on this card tremendously. And unfortunately, I don't think this is enough to push Imbue Priest to make it better. So it's okay at best, but honestly, again, kind of disappointing for Priest. So moving on over to Warrior here, we have the Keeper of the Flame, a 5-mana 5/5 battle cry. Give all minions in your hand +3/+3. They are discarded in 3 turns. This is kind of like a smoldering card again, but a little bit of a different direction here. Pretty big notable hand buff. Playing a 5/5 on 5, nah, not your favorite thing to do, but, you know, you could maybe make a big dump turn on turn 6 if you have a sufficient number of things in hand and, you know, they are sufficiently cheap. In other words, you know, you want to start putting these stats into play immediately. So you don't want to play like a 6-cost card with only +3/+3. You want to play like 3 2-cost cards with +3/+3. So you're cheating +9/+9 into play immediately. But I will say that goes at odds a little bit with the upside of having these stats. In other words, you know, like, why are you sitting on all these 2-cost cards in hand? What on earth are you doing in the early game to get to this point? And if, you know, you're relying on these stats to win, don't you need to be a little bit more aggressively minded? And, you know, for instance, hand buff Death Knight does that pretty well. They're able to get stuff down while still keeping the hand relatively full for later. I don't know if Warrior is going to be able to do that as successfully, nor do I know if the payoffs are like as consistently good. So in other words, I don't know if you can really form an entire deck around this game plan. Maybe there's something with Dark Gift cards where you're just playing stuff, you're getting Dark Gifts in hand, and then you really swing hard in the mid game to some extent. I think that's reasonable, but I still don't really see it getting there. I think this is coming up just a little bit short. I don't actually think the discard's necessarily as much of a problem. That probably you just, you know, you want to play this stuff anyway. So I don't think that's really the downside. I think it's just getting all the pieces together for this to make a ton of sense. Doesn't get there, but I will say the output is notably high. So if some good pieces come into Warrior later, keep an eye on it. I'm saying like 3 stars basically is where this is going to land. Moving on to the Shadow Flame Suffusion. Here is one of those Dark Gift cards for Warrior. 3-mana fire spell. Deal 3 damage and discover a Warrior minion with a Dark Gift. So I like a lot about this, right? I like that it's narrowing it down to Warrior minions. That's good. You know, you're going to hit some more consistent targets. We know Dark Gifts can be great. And the cost of the Dark Gift here is honestly not bad, because you're not going to feel terrible sometimes just playing this to deal 3. Maybe that's clean up something on board. Maybe that's just some chip damage face. Maybe there's some desperation plays late where you send that 3 to face and try to find a charge minion to end the game, right? I can see a few lines there where that does make sense. So I think this is a pretty good option as far as Dark Gift cards are concerned. Moving on here to the Dragon Turtle. It is literally a beast and a dragon. It's a 4-mana 3/6 battle cry. If you're holding a minion with a Dark Gift, give your hero +3 attack this turn and 6 armor. This is yet another like kind of good Dark Gift payoff card, like the one we saw for Death Knight as well. +3 attacks, you know, great. Clean up a little minion, just push some face damage in an aggressive deck, and then 6 armor. Hey man, that's a significant amount of armor as well. So you kind of see like a little 3-card thing happening here where I'm keeping the hand full with Dark Gifts. I'm buffing them with the Keeper of Flame. Like, I see it. I just don't think we have enough hints of this succeeding so far to be worth it. There's a little bit of a dragon tie-in here as well, of course, because this is a dragon and we have the dragon card. Dark Gift as well. Like if you're holding a dragon, discover a minion with Dark Gift. So there are a few things there coming together. I don't think this is going to push into meta relevance with just these cards. I don't think they're enough, but I could see this being like a tier 3 deck that comes together and is like, you know, good players can maybe climb with it just out of range of the meta. That's not terrible. So I'm actually kind of excited to try this. I just like Dark Gifts. I think they're really fun to play, and there's just enough here to tie it all together. So I'm basically saying like these are all kind of like 3-star off meta cards. So moving on to yet another Dark Gift card here with the Shadow Flame Stalker, a 4-mana 4/3 elemental beast. Discover a demon with a Dark Gift and get a copy of it. Once again, nice narrowed targets here for the discover. And the copy is also actually pretty cool. I could see some worlds where you get a really nice, like cheap card that's got some nice buffs or some really cool effect, and then getting a copy of it is actually rather exciting. This could result in a big swing, basically multiplying the Dark Gift upside. The risk here, of course, is that this card costs 4, and that is actually a pretty big commitment, and this is pretty terrible on board. So I do think that narrows the deck fit for this really substantially. This probably only goes in a Wallow Dark Gift deck. I don't think you can run this generically in other lists because the 4 is just going to be too much of a commitment. It's way more overhead than you like. But I'll also say, even for Wallow decks, like the copy aspect doesn't really help. They actually prefer, I think, probably getting more Dark Gift options so they can hit more reliably Wallow targets. Like they'd rather have 2 different selections of Dark Gifts as opposed to 2 copies of the same selection of the Dark Gift, increasing the odds to find more buffs or charge or whatever. So I'm not even sure Wallow decks necessarily want to run this one. So the question is the Dark Gift multiplication good enough to make up for the tempo sacrifice and perhaps the fit problems? I'm on the fence. I think ultimately 4 mana might just be too much for this one and hold it back too far. So next up here for Warlock is Conflagrate, a 1 mana fire spell. It deals 5 damage to a minion and its owner draws a card. So 2 things here, right? Of course, destroy your own stuff, which can be sometimes valuable historically in Warlock, perhaps even now with some of the crazy death rattle stuff they can do. And then you also get to draw a card. You know, it's kind of a bad eat the imp for Warlock, I guess, a little cheaper. Alternatively, if you're desperate, you know, use this to clear something of your opponents, but you are doing it with a little bit of a resource advantage for them, drawing them a card. Like theoretically, there's some mill game plans there as well. We actually have crazy mill Warlock stuff right now. That does that so decisively and so big. I don't think they need a card like this necessarily. I don't think this really adds in much, but it might be free because they just get like a 5 damage removal and don't care about drawing cards or whatever. So maybe a little in addition there. That deck's pretty off meta, only good in incredibly top level players' hands, and even then, still not the best, I don't think. So I don't know. I think this is usually going to be clunky and risky. I will say that like giving your opponents cards used to be something that felt so terrible, but today everybody has so many freaking cards all the time anyway that the downside here is probably a lot lower than it used to be. Like, you know, your opponent going from 2 to 3 cards is an enormous difference. That feels like you're giving them such an advantage and so big of a change. You're probably going from 8 to 9 cards. It's like, well, they already had 8 cards. They were going to have something to do anyway. they had lots of options. They were going to fill their turn. I'm not worried about giving them extra value. So I don't know. In modern day Hearthstone, where there's just a million cards always, maybe this is less of a downside, and it does just become a nice, efficient minion removal tool. So I think this card's probably all right. And then moving on here to the Embers Destroyer, 3 mana, 3/3. Whenever your hero takes damage on your turn, deal 3 damage to a random enemy minion. So a little bit of a payoff here for some Pain Warlock stuff. You know, you got life tap, a few other options here and there. Maybe this is setting the stage for some future Pain Warlock support. That's not something we see succeeding currently in Hearthstone. I don't really think too many options at all to support that right now. Maybe a few still lingering, but I don't think this moves the needle to set that up right now. Probably a fine card to keep in mind for later if some of that does come back in the next 2 years or whatever. This could make the cut. I don't think it's a crazy good payoff, but could result in some nice board swings. If you know, turn 5 or 6 comes along, you're able to play a couple things to get this going. Maybe 3 is a little too late then, and on turn 3 this feels bad, but if this like sticks turn 3 going into turn 4, probably fine. All right, so those are the cards. Let's go ahead and rate these from 1 to 5 stars. Volcaros is a 3-star card. Premate is a 3-star card. Frostburn Matriarch is a 3-star card. Smoldering Ascent is a 2-star card. Light of the New Moon is a 2-star card. Spirit of the Kaldorei is a 2-star card. Keeper of Flame is a 3-star card. Shadow Flame Suffusion is a 4-star card. Dragon Turtle is a 3-star card. Shadow Flame Stalker is a 2-star card. Conflagrate is a 2-star card. Embers Destroyer is a 3-star card. And there you go, folks. That is the Emerald Dream mini set. I have no idea how big of an impact this set's going to have. I think there's a few solid looking cards, but I don't see it making a ton of disruptive moves. Maybe a few things get slotted into current decks. I don't think anything really new pops up. Maybe some fun Fyrax stuff, but I don't know. We'll see. I guess we got 2 weeks to find until we find out. So we're gonna be waiting and speculating a lot. But share your thoughts on these cards down below. Thanks as always for joining me for these reviews, and until next time, game on.